There's been close to 3,000 builders that have been liquidated over the space of the last 3 years. They've had a negative light, and every time the media gets a chance, they're always chasing, fighting, hunting down builders that have either gone bust and really putting builders in a negative light. I wanted to bring on a builder today that has built many homes and been in industry for well over 15 years, and no, he's not liquidated, still working and still building houses all around New South Wales. But I wanted to bring him on board so that you as the listeners can get to understand what things you need to consider to insulate, to prepare yourself, but also to profit from being able to partner with a good builder to either build your own home, your investment, or potentially your development. I want to go through things regarding costs. I want to make sure you understand the use of a builder, not just to build your home, but as part of the building and design process, what things you need to consider, and the importance of having a building inspector. How you build your next home could be the difference of you making a lot, making something, or making nothing. And in today's episode, we're going to bring in Hus from Halliam Homes, who's been not only a builder, but in the industry for over 15 years, acting as an estimator to a supervisor, also doing inspections on the side, to be now a builder that builds up and down the coast of New South Wales. I'm Iannuzzelli. This is what school should have taught you. Let's get into today's episode.
Everything school should have taught you in one place. With a property portfolio of over 17 million and an accountancy firm of over 16,000 clients, as well as being an accountant to some of the wealthiest people in Australia, Jeremy Iannuzzelli will be sharing his lessons on everything school should have taught you so you can build the life you want.
Today's episode, we're bringing in a builder, and I think this is a relevant conversation and topic as interest rates start to potentially come down and the building environment and the building industry starts to speed back up again. And we've heard about all these building collapses and builders going bust and people having half-built homes. And it's really now just getting a little bit of advice and the context from a builder who's in the industry, been in the industry for a number of years. And I've brought on Hus today. Hus has been a client of mine for a number of years, a very successful builder, building up and down the coast of New South Wales, built many homes and, did his time as an employee and then runs now a very successful company called Halliam Homes. Hus, welcome to What School Should Have Taught You. How are we going?
Thanks, Jazz. Going well, mate. Thank you for inviting me on.
Now, very interesting. You've been running around today to try to find a microphone for this podcast. Is that right?
That's it, mate. Always need to do the best for you, mate.
We're leveling up it. We're leveling up you, not just as a builder, but leveling up you now as a bit of a social media star. But mate, thank you very much for coming on board. Today, I really want to share with all of our listeners, the building industry, what's happening. We read all these articles, doom and gloom, and builders going bust and half-built homes and dodgy builders. We've got all these YouTube channels now calling out builders for dodgy works, like Zah here from Site Inspections. Mind you, a fantastic YouTube channel that I love watching, predominantly does a lot of site inspections around Victoria, and there's a lot of things that he points out that are non-compliant or good from far, but far from good. But today I really want to bring on someone who's in the trenches, who's been building for a number of years, and I know you build a wide range of homes from, mum and dad stock standard homes, investment properties. I know you've built commercial dwellings and you've built some, luxury master built homes as well. So you've done a variety in your career and you've been in the industry for well over 15 years now. So mate, thank you very much for coming on board. I want to get straight into it today and I want to ask you questions about building costs. We've seen a significant rise in building costs over the last 5 years, and the COVID pandemic and building shortages has been much to blame of it. It's been written all over the media. But where are you seeing supplies, building costs and building supplies now being, say, midway through 2025?
The building costs have kind of stagnated a bit over the last 6 to 12 months. During COVID, yes, we had massive increases across the board. What we're finding now is people's cost of living is rising, so therefore they're having to increase their service costs to counteract that. So even our designers are putting their prices up now for designs. They haven't changed their prices for over 2 years, but now the pressures that's going on, they've had to diversify their portfolio to look at different revenue streams as well, doing interior design and landscape design. And also they've put their prices up to suit because everyone wants to get paid more because everyone's mortgage has gone up and everyone's grocery bill has gone up. So their staff cost has gone up. And then on the back of that, the builders going bust is costing these consultants and suppliers money. I've talked to plumbers, electricians, designers that when those builders go bust, they're taking hits of 20, 30, 40 grand every time a builder goes bust. So they have to recoup that cost somewhere. And that's where I'm seeing a lot of the pressures coming now in industry is because of failing builders, it's causing us grief and our prices to go up.
So copper, wood, concrete, that's kind of all stabilised now?
That's just general. You get that every year. Like brick price is always going to go up. Wood price is always going to go up. Sometimes they'll come down depending on supply, but everything will always have an increase every year. I've never seen prices come down in the 15 years I've done this job considerably to a point where it makes a difference to house costs. Costs always go up. So whether that's going to be 1%, 2%, 10% during COVID, I've never seen prices tend to come down. And that's even with the labor front now. We're paying more for skilled trades and we're paying more to get a quality job. Like we're not hiring the guys that can't do the work to the standard we want. We will happily pay more to get the guys that will do the job to the standard we want, where it won't need to be redone.
And in your industry, in anyone's industry, when you're building a home, time's money. So if it's taking a long time to build a home, I've always given incentives to builders to say, hey, if you guys can build this in 9 months, I'll give you an extra $15,000. You build it in 12, I'll give you an extra 10, and you take the whole time, you get nothing. So incentives are important because the quicker you can get your property being built, the quicker it can start to earn rent, you can sell it, extract equity. There's multiple things in there, but it's good to work with your builder and have KPIs, have incentives. If they're doing things at a good time frame and they're doing things with no mistakes and you haven't got callback issues or warranty issues, then sometimes you've got to reward those people as well. Now, just to recap on that, so human capital, so all the trades or people linked to the building industry that have been impacted by builders going bust, you mentioned they're recouping that cost, and you said, look, they're having to pass that on other costs and services they're providing. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So some of our suppliers are insuring their losses as well. But even when you do that, you're giving a percentage of that invoice total to an insurance company. So either way, it's going to drive your overheads up, right? So whether they're recouping it directly from other builders by increasing their rates or whether they're insuring their risk, it's going to drive costs up. And the amount of builders we're seeing go bust at the moment, that is a driving factor. And it is going to affect the prices of the houses.
Absolutely.
Especially if I'm getting calls from developers. There's one in where I live near the Central Coast in Terrigal that the builder left a job and the developer's now trying to find someone to cover that job off. It's at lock-up stage and it's 6 units on one block. The developer's gone bust. Someone needs to pick up the pieces there.
And that's where obviously there's other costs involved in it, picking up somebody else's mess.
That's right.
One thing you did say is that in your many years of being in the industry, you haven't seen costs go down. Now, that's a relevant point because if you get a chance, anyone listening, if you look through some of our podcasts, you'll see that we've spoken to various people in the industry, from people that run property development groups and property development mentoring classes to property consultants and building designers. The one thing you heard them say is that if you're buying something, you don't necessarily want to wait 10 years or 5 years to build it because you might have zoning changes. More importantly, what Hus just said is that your cost will go up. So building something today is going to be ultimately much cheaper than building something in 5 years' time. And that doesn't necessarily mean that in 5 years' time, the property you've built is going to be worth much more compared to what you built 5 years ago. So if you're sitting on land or you're sitting on an idea that you want to get something being built, better to do it now than potentially wait for 5 or 6 years where the cost might increase by 30% and all of a sudden you get a bit of a blowout. Now, Hus, I want to ask you a question because there's not much information out there around this. Should your builder be involved in the building design process? So that's sitting down with the building designer or the architect. Should the builder be part of that, or should you completely just leave them to the side, get your designs being done, and then start shopping around to builders?
No. 100%. I'm a big advocate for builders being involved in the design process. We are heavily involved with our design and build clients in the design process. So the way we operate is we know the client's budget up front. And it is all about transparency. If you're working with builder first, you need to be transparent. We're not here to rip you off. We're here to provide you the best you can get for the budget you have, right? So we'll sit down with the client first, get their scope of work, so what they want done, the style they're after, their budget they have, and then we will brief the designers about how big the house can be, what type of designs we can incorporate into the house in terms of curves or, floating cantilevers and things that will affect the structure cost, the type of pools, the type of pool construction. We will look at all that and guide the design on how we want the house to be built, essentially, and to be able to meet that budget. So the size of the house is probably the most important one, and the type of finishes, obviously. So we will find out their budget, and we know what market rates are. As much as we don't use square meter rates to price houses, all of our houses are done properly with builder quantities. We know roughly where it's going to sit based on a square meter rate. So we can tell the designer, hey, we can go up to 350 square meters on this house, or we can go up to 250 on this house, depending on the client's budget. And then we'll design the house and the structure around their budget to make sure that we always come in close to their budget or preferably on.
How often do you see plans that come to you as a builder that someone's got done with a building designer or an architect and said, I want you to build this home? How often has their draws have dropped when you've set a price and it wasn't actually anywhere near their budget?
Pretty much every architect job we get. Because costs do move quite a bit, what that architect is designing, by the time that house gets built, it may no longer be able to be built for that price. So we are very much an advocate advocate for doing it builder first. But yeah, when we do get architect jobs, generally it's not really going to work to the client's budget unless that architect is very, very experienced in the building industry as well, like in terms of being ear to the ground with multiple builders, or they work primarily for builders. Those guys aren't going to know the cost properly. Like pretty much every architect job we get, we have a massive blowout of hundreds of thousands of dollars from what the client's budget is. And we then have to cost engineer the job after the design's already done to try and bring the cost down. So then we're redesigning or re-speccing jobs to bring that cost back down to an acceptable level for them.
And again, we've heard from prior people on the What School Should Have Taught You podcast, especially John Karapalewski, mention, quite often they'll get plans being drawn from an architect, gone to a builder, and then the builder will actually engage them to redesign it because it's just simply not inside their budget. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. I've always had this conversation with lots of people, building costs, roughly $1,500 a square metre. That's the going rate. So everyone then says, well, $1,500 a square metre times by the amount of square metres of my dwelling, my price should be about $455,000 for argument's sake. Now, the maths is not correct, but I'm using that as an example. How accurate is that as a way of roughly working out what the build cost would be? And is there a rough indication of what a low spec, medium spec and high spec cost would be on a per square meterage rate? Because that number, I think 1,500 I've chosen, was probably the number I was using about from 8 years ago. That's drastically changed. But how often do you hear that, Huss, the build rate should be $1,500 a square meter? Is that common dialogue now?
Yeah, not that low, but yes, we do get that. And that's why we refuse to price a job off square meter rates. We use it for budgeting purposes, and we always use a higher rate than what it will come in at. What we're seeing, it depends on the spec level of the job. As you said before, we build everything from $2.5 million duplexes with basements to investor housing for disabled people. So the spec level of the home will affect the price. And we're quoting our custom clients between 3.5 to 4,000 square meter generally, and then our lower end clients, there's 2.5 to 3.2 a square meter, depending on what they've got in it. It is considerably more than the numbers you were saying. And back when I was in the project home industry, I haven't seen those numbers for a long time. So those numbers are quite ancient from my recollection.
So for everybody out there, if you're talking $1,400, $1,500 a square meter, you're way off.
Way off. By the time you put carpets, timber flooring, these days, everybody wants a pool or curves. It's specced up. Kitchens cost a lot these days as well, and having the house specced up is going to considerably drive those costs up. But the biggest factor we're seeing now is basics. And a lot of people will be talking about this as well. We import our windows from China on our custom homes just to be able to meet basic requirements, because the local supply, you're paying 3 times more for it. People still want to have the beautiful home with all the glass, but unfortunately, the glass in Australia is just so out of the ballpark of what people's budgets are that it's very difficult to provide that without having to do imported products, So that's how we counteract some of those issues.
So you're just trying to find other suppliers in other places to meet this BASIC 7 here in New South Wales. Again, for anybody that's listening, BASICs is a requirement for the heating and cooling. We did mention that in a podcast, again, speaking with one of the guests about John, the property consultant. So these are extra costs. If you're, again, listening or watching us on YouTube, these are all extra costs that add to the build cost of the property, which don't necessarily provide you extra value. So then that leads me to my next question: low cost building designs or low cost construction methods. Yep. Is that a thing? Are builders actually thinking about it, or are they there to take whatever dollar they can out of the pocket? Do you want to just explain to us about low cost building designs and also maybe low cost construction methods?
Next time you're in an area where there's a lot of new housing, just have a drive around and see how every builder builds their houses. So you'll notice a lot of people will be using steel frames these days, hybrid frames, which is steel frame for timber floor. You got cut on site framing, you got prefab framing. Then you got the way that the external skin of the building is actually constructed. So we won't build a house without external wall wrap, but there's still builders out there doing no wall wrap on their houses if they're brick veneer, which in my opinion is not the right way to be building.
And what's the importance of wall wrap for people that don't know?
Well, it's about future-proofing your building, right? So you're trying to reduce the moisture coming into your building and improves your insulation properties. It seals it up. So we tape all our windows, we detail it properly to try and reduce as much heat loss and air transfer as possible. We're not building full passive houses, but what we're doing is making sure we're building the best we can for the client's budget. We can build a passive house if we have to, but I believe wrapping all your houses with vapor permeable wrap should be the standard. And I don't know how builders are still doing brickwork without wrap. I don't agree with it at all. But that's one way that they can reduce costs. So we steer clients towards Hebel and render if they want a rendered finish, just because it is cheaper to construct. It's also a lot quicker than getting bricklayers on site. Generally, that's one way to reduce costs. If you want that look, cladded houses are very popular at the moment. Cladding comes with its own challenges as well, making sure the walls are straight. So we spend extra money making sure everything's straight before we put the cladding on. And we always batten our cladding as well to provide the air barrier. And that helps reduce moisture in the cavity as well. So those different driving factors that will increase the cost of the home. Some people will just put cladding straight on the frame without having that battened system. It's not going to be a straight. It's not technically the right way to do it because you won't have that break. People still using non-treated frames. I don't know why you would, but people still using non-treated frames and the type of roof finish as well. So obviously if you want to try and reduce costs, you're not going to go choose a terracotta roof tile. You're going to be putting a ColourBond roof on. So there's ways to bring those costs down by just using more available materials that are obviously cheaper and will still meet the requirements of the building.
Now, the double-storey versus single-storey debate always is when I'm building properties, it's always an issue that I always face about the cost. You just want to share with people, an approximate rough increase of cost from going from a single-storey dwelling to a double-storey dwelling. And if you're not necessarily getting extra living areas or living space or more floor square meters, it might be something that going to a single-storey might be more profitable for the individual. Do you want to roughly talk about the cost increase from a single-storey to a double and why?
That's not something I can probably quantify, to tell you the truth. We design every house to suit the block. We don't have any standard designs or anything. It's not something we generally compare. So in terms of building the house, you would have the whole floor system in your scaffolding costs, plus the time outlay as well to build a double-storey house. It takes longer to get to the lockup and get the house watertight because you do have that second story that you have to construct first before stripping scaff and putting your lower roofs on. So from a timing aspect, you're definitely adding 6 weeks onto the build. And then with your scaffold, you're talking cost price $20,000 worth of scaffold. The floor would be 50 grand. So you're probably talking $150,000 to $200,000 by the time you're all said and done. You got staircases and everything else that goes into that product that you wouldn't have to pay for on a single-story house.
So that's important. That's important you said these things because scaffolding, I think of $20,000 scaffolding that you've got to pay. It's a cost to you. It doesn't necessarily,
That's right.
But it doesn't. You're not adding value to my home.
No, unless you have a super small block. Single-story is obviously going to be a lot cheaper to build. So
and time as well. You said roughly 6 to 7 weeks, give or take. So again, for everybody listening, if you're thinking about going, whether it's single-storey or double-storey, depending whether you build in your own home, you want it lovely, or you're building for investment, you've got to have a bit of a think about that extra cost for building a double-storey home. Does it actually translate into more dollars, more profit at the end of the job, at the end of the deal when it's all sold? So that extra could be $50,000 or $150,000, that extra 6, 7, 8 weeks, that extra money that you're paying, is it giving you more profit? And that's where you've got to put that into your feasibility. You've got to have a chat with your building designer. You've got to have a chat with your builder, because it may look beautiful at the end, but not give you the cookies. And in the end, we're in this, if we are looking at property as a method of business or even a method of investment, we've got to make sure that there's profit at the end of the day, whether it's capital growth or money in our back dollar. Couple things. As a builder, where would you recommend that a client should be spending their money? Because we all hear from the block, it's, kitchen and bathroom, but where have you, again, building many houses, where would you spend your money as a builder to really improve the value of the home, or maybe the value at the end when it's sold, or for equity purposes? Okay,
so that's probably a two-sided question. For me as a builder versus a client, depends on the client's requirements for the job. So are they building it to sell, or are they building it to stay in? So if they're building to stay in, I'd recommend a completely different set of items versus someone that's building to sell.
Let's say build to sell. A lot of people are either building to sell or build to rent.
So building to sell, then I would focus on the stuff that is going to look good. So it is your kitchens, your bathrooms, your flooring. The facade of the home will make a huge difference as well. Swimming pools, some people like them, some people don't. They are added cost to keep your house. You always got to keep up with that pool. A lot of people are going to start to hate that when they're paying the bills for the heaters and the chlorinators and everything else. But definitely the kitchens and bathrooms, they sell houses. Everyone knows that. It sells houses. For me as a builder, it'd be completely different. So for me as a builder, I'd be looking at the sustainability of the house. So I'll be trying to make it as thermally comfortable as possible, reduce my energy use as much as possible, putting as much insulation in the home as possible. Those double glazed windows, even if you don't need it for basics, I would be putting double glazed windows in every single house I build for myself. And I do recommend that to clients as well. And then there's other technologies coming in like HRV systems, so heat recovery ventilation. That's something else you would look at if you're doing it for yourself. But would that get you more as a resale? Probably not. If someone doesn't know what a HRV system is, it's not going to help you sell the house, So those things aren't going to affect the sale price, in my opinion, unless someone really wants an energy efficient, healthy home. So those kitchens and bathrooms, you can still get really good looking kitchens for smartly dollars spent. You don't have to have 40 mil stone. 20 mil stone's coming back in. There's a house I'm building right now that they downgrade from 40 mil to 20 mil because that's the style they wanted. They wanted the seamless, thin stone on the on their countertops. They didn't want the 40 mil stone. So you can reduce costs and still have a really nice kitchen that will look good at a resale time.
And I suppose the one question I want to ask as well, coming back to where we're spending money and all those other things, like big voids in properties and large spans, you know, those big open rooms. I think, and knowing and building many homes myself, not to just to live in, but for investment and resale, they all add extra cost because you've got those steel beams and a lot of engineering in place. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%. So generally when you have a big void, even most stair voids now, they are getting bigger, you will need some structure beefed up around the stair void. They're called wind beams. So that just stops your 6 meter high wall on that side of the staircase deflecting from wind loads. So there's generally going to be extra steel in those areas. When you do have a void, you know, apart from the staircase in the middle of the house or at the entry or wherever it's going to be, we also have to scaffold that up so the guys can build the house. You know, we need scaffold and we need platforms there for them to be able to do the ceilings on the second story. So you're paying more again for that structure, the temporary structure during the build, and it does add considerable cost. So you got all those beams around the floor to hold the floor up and the structure underneath the floor. If you're not doing the concrete slab, you know, you're going to need load bearing walls in those areas as well to be able to support the home so that void can work.
I've got one question. Sorry, I want to make sure I ask this one because if I forget it, I'm going to kick myself at the end. Box gutters. Now, flat roofs, pitched roofs, because it seems like now we've really changed our, you know, the design of homes. You know, as a young kid growing up, every home was pitched and, you know, you had hips and valleys and everyone had gutters, and I never saw a box gutter in my life until probably the last 10, 12 years. Every house has these big parapet walls, which are literally walls that make the facade look good but serve no purpose. And then these very low gradient or flat roofs with these big box gutters that cause lots of issues. That's my opinion. As a builder, box gutters or conventional roof?
Look, I hate them. I absolutely hate box gutters, but I have one on my own house. You probably have one on your house too, Jeremy.
I probably do. Probably. I'll know when it starts to leak into the roof. But
that's right. So generally, we try and avoid them and design them out as much as possible because you can have parapet walls at the front. If you design your roof properly, you can avoid them. All right. So there are situations where you can have a parapet wall, but we'll just put a hip roof, a gable end roof against the parapet, and then deflect the water away from those parapets without using box gutters. It's when you start getting the low pitch roofs that the box gutters are going to almost become a necessity, especially on duplex scenarios. You'll have a box gutter at the party wall going front to back, you know, if they're trying to get two hip ends or two gable ends on that duplex running the length of the duplex. So
now you're hearing, sorry, Huss, you're hearing lots of different words like gable ends and hip ends.
Sorry.
I would say to you guys, if you're wanting to go through the design process, you know what they are, gable ends, hip ends, know what a box gutter is so you know what to look for. Again, speak to the builder, ask questions. Is the design of this home going to give me any issues in the future? And most builders will probably tell you box gutters in the future. Huss?
You're always going to give you issues. So the code makes us put a lot of, you know, safeguard into it in terms of overflows and sumps and site inspections. You mentioned before, loves to go and pick up a non-compliant box gutter. It's probably one of the most common things you'll see on a building site is a non-compliant box gutter. So it is unfortunately one of the many things that have become a norm to get these facades to work. But in all instances, talking from a builder's perspective, having eaves and having gutters outside the building is the safest way to build to future-proof your home from leaks. So having those gutters and the roof deflecting water away from those walls is probably the best way to build a house. It's also quicker to build a house.
So again, anyone out there looking to build for longevity or an investment, you know, you've got to think of those things because they are all additional costs later on in the future that you're going to maybe have to fork out. And when we are investing in property, not just for capital purposes, but for, you know, income purposes, we've got to make sure that these things, you know, last or stand as long as they possibly can, because every dollar that gets spent is a dollar less in your pocket for you to enjoy. Now, we did speak about site inspections with on the YouTube channel, and I won't go too much into it, but there's a lot of, you know, every time I watch that YouTube series there's a huge amount of issues. But is that really happening in the industry, or the builders picking a lot of that stuff up and that's more sensationalized for very rare cases?
Look, it definitely happens. We see it a lot on sites. You know, driving around estates, you will definitely see some non-compliant work. There was parapet I saw the other day that was probably 15 degrees on the lean. It's going to happen. And I tell all my clients at the start of the job, we will make mistakes. Every builder makes mistakes. It's how the builder rectifies the mistakes. There's a difference between a good builder and a bad builder. The builder just goes and covers it up and pretends it was never there and sweeps it under the rug. That's a bad builder. If the builder can pick up, hey guys, you know, you've stuffed that up, there's a defect there, and get the trades to come back and fix it before the next step, then that's a good builder. And even if the wrong thing's put into a house, whether it's a wrong finish or a wrong product, having a builder that will just rip it out and get it right is what you're looking for. You don't want a builder that's going to try and be like, no, it's fine, leave it alone. That's not what we're about. If the client's unhappy and if the work's defective, we will always do our best to get that rectified to the client's standard. Now, so not running away from a problem, but there's a lot of builders out there that will just cut the cost. They've underpriced the job. They just need to keep it moving, or they can't afford to physically fix it, because there are a lot of builders out there that are working on fixed rate profit margins as well. There's guys that will build a house for 80 grand profit as a supervision fee. If they make a mistake, there's not much fat in them there for them to be able to fix that before they start losing money.
Absolutely. Now, one big thing, building inspectors, I have to actually say I've never engaged one before. I've always felt that I've had really good people around me to make sure that things are getting done right. But would you be recommending, again, first time person wanting to build their own home, or you might be an investor building duplexes, would you be recommending that person to get a building inspector done and inspections being done at all crucial stages?
I would have to say yes. Yeah, as you know, Jeremy, I used to run a building inspection business before I started Halliam Homes. So I was a big advocate for people that didn't know what they were looking for to get a building inspector. And we picked up a multitude of issues, especially on project home builders that have one guy running 20 jobs. There's going to be a raft of issues on those projects. We picked up a lot of stuff early in the piece for those clients that saved them money and also saved them issues at handover. Having things fixed before handover was a big part of what we did. We had walls that were on angles and you could see it on the tile lines or on the timber, and the clients didn't know what they were looking for. So having those items fixed up and having someone with the right set of eyes that is in a position to advocate for you, and not just the builder trying to, as I said, sweep it under a rug and get his progress payment and move on, is definitely a good idea. And the cost that you're going to pay, a couple of grand for a building inspector, they will usually save you more money in either headaches or cost down the road to fix problems.
And I'm a big advocate for it, even though, again, I haven't done it. I've had some really good people around me that would come in and be essentially a proxy building inspector for me. But there all issues, no matter how good the builder is, there's always going to be some little issues. And, it's again, someone reviewing their work. It's just how quickly the builder can respond to fix those problems. And, I've had issues on my stuff. Builders came in, fixed it straight away, and we're all happy. Now, last thing I want to talk to you about today is build contracts. Now, I've noticed, again, building over many, many years, the builder will supply their own building contract, and sometimes it's tailored to the consumer, or it could be tailored to the builder itself. How, again, more of a personal question regarding your business, but how open are you to receiving, say, a building contract that has been prepared by maybe the client solicitor, or, a building contract that's been prepared by a registered professional? Do builders only use their own contracts, or are there other contracts out there they can use where there's a good protection layer for both builder and consumer?
Yes, every builder will run their business differently in that respect. I personally won't use another contract. So we only use HIA contracts. So in our business, and HIA being the governing body, you got the master builders, HIA, they're the two big ones. HIA is more geared towards the client. So it is actually, I guess, safer for the client to use a HIA contract in my experience. I've been using HIA contracts since I started in the industry. Every builder I've ever worked for was using a HIA contract. So I know it inside out. I know everything about that contract and how to navigate it. So if a client was to come to me with an architect-prepared contract or a solicitor-prepared contract, I don't have to go and educate myself or pay someone to read through it and educate myself about this contract and what I'm up for, really. We allow the clients to make amendments to clauses, like we'll negotiate with clients about clauses in the contract and removing and adding clauses, but it's all still generally based around the HIA contract. So I only do fixed price work as well. So all of our contracts are fixed price. We don't do any cost plus work. So the way we structure our contracts are probably different to other builders. So everything I do is what I've done before, and I know how to do inside out. So
And for many people,
other builders might be open to it, but personally myself, I will only use a HIA contract.
Beautiful. For many people that are listening, you mentioned something about fixed price contract and cost plus. Do you just want to elaborate on both? Again, people might be listening to this for the first time. Do you want to elaborate on both what a fixed price contract is and a cost plus contract is?
So a fixed price contract is definitely going to be safer for the client always. So the builder wears the risk on a fixed price contract. Yes, the contract will probably have contingencies built into it on our end to cover any mistakes or unforeseen circumstances on site, but the contract will clearly stipulate what we can and can't charge you for as a variation. So generally my clients, the only thing that is not fixed in the project is rock. Rock excavation is the one item we exclude as a fixed price on all our builds. We will even fix price our peering costs. We fix price our spoil removal costs. What that does is essentially whatever you sign signed the contract for is what you're going to get your house delivered for unless you make a change. So unless you tell me on site, hey, Huss, I don't like that toilet, I want to rip it out and replace it, or hey, I want to upgrade my sink or my tap or my stone, there's not going to be a variation from my end unless we hit rock at the site start stage. So that's probably the safest option for you as a client. A cost plus contract, generally it's done any costs spent on the project plus a percentage of builder's margin that is stipulated in the contract is what the builder can charge you. So if the excavation costs 10 grand, they'll put 10 grand plus their builder's margin on and pass the bill on to you. So you're paying for anything that happens on that project. So the cost can blow out. And generally from what I see, cost plus contracts, they're done at a ballpark figure that's going to be lower than what the house is actually going to cost to build. So we've actually previously lost a job to a builder that was a cost price builder, and that client came back to us and we ended up building their house because the builder's price just kept going up and down. There was no certainty. They didn't know what it was going to end up at. And there was no, I guess, surety from the client of what their project was actually going to cost them.
Yeah.
And generally, if you don't have cash, you're going to be hard pressed getting a loan for a cost plus contract. Banks want to see fixed price contracts as well.
And that's an important point. I was going to note it, that if you're going to go down the cost plus route, be prepared to part with a hell of a lot of cash. Generally, banks want to know what they're lending the money for, and they want to know how much they're lending you. They're not going to just give you an open limit and say go nuts, because they want to make sure that the loan they're giving you, the security tied to it, there's value attached. Mate, one last thing I want to speak to you about before I leave you today, and you've given some really golden nuggets. You know, people that are listening to us on iTunes and Spotify, don't forget to like and subscribe, or YouTube, like and subscribe. But, you know, you're giving some really gold nuggets about ways we can reduce our costs and things that we need to be doing to involve the builder. You know, talked about fixed price and cost plus. But one last thing of variations, and that is probably a phone call. Again, as an accountant, I will consult people on it, and, you know, not consult, I should say console people on getting hit with variations from builders. But what should people be expecting a normal variation to look like, or when they would expect a variation, if any, if they are going through the build of their investment or the build of their own home?
At the stage of the tender being prepared for the client, if there is any provisional allowances. So generally a builder will put in a provisional allowance if they don't have the information at hand to be able to accurately price the item. So early stages of a job, that's going to be your hydraulics, your structurals. So your hydraulics is your stormwater system. Any piering and stuff like that will be done as a provisional allowance if we don't have the information we need to accurately make a call on it. Once we have that information and we can enter a contract, you shouldn't have many provisional allowances in the job unless the client hasn't made their mind up about fixtures and fittings. You know, you might put a PA in $400 a toilet, $1,000 a toilet, whatever it is. Those are the items that will go up and down during the build. If you have a fixed price contract, there shouldn't be any variations during the build that isn't stipulated in the contract that can be changed. So such as rock, or if you didn't have piering as a fixed cost, if your builder left piering out, and then they'll physically measure how many meters of piers they put in on site and then charge you for it. If you're making changes on site, be prepared for a cost increase. Nothing's free. Every time you make a change, we need to either wear it or the client needs to wear it. You know, if you want to upgrade your toilet, ideally get all your upgrades done prior to contract or prior to it being installed. You know, there are builders that will charge you a variation fee once you sign the contract. Even if the variation is worth $100, they might have a variation fee of $2,000 for the paperwork. You know, depending how big their admin team is, someone physically has to go and cost that item up, do the paperwork for it, put it in the system, adjust the orders. That all costs money. That's all labor that someone has to pay for. So we personally don't charge variation fees, but there are builders out there that will try and force clients not to make changes during construction by having that $2,000 variation fee. But at the end of the day, that's just it's a fee to play the game. If you want to make changes, pay the fee, make the change.
Absolutely. If there's extra admin work and there's extra time that someone needs to spend, the cost needs to be, put somewhere. So a couple things today, just for, again, all people that are listening, there's some really gold nuggets in there. We've spoken about building costs, and while some of the supplies have started to stagnate, which is fantastic, we're not going to be seeing huge increases of 10, 20, 30% like we did during COVID. Human capital cost has increased, and that is a result of multiple things. Cost of living, obviously going up through inflation, and obviously lots of builders going bust, and these professional services firms around the building sector or tradies having to wear a lot of that loss and passing that on. Builder definitely should be consulted and included as part of the build design process. Low cost dwelling constructions, single story versus double story, the type of products that you use. These are little things that may not take away a lot of value at the end when the property's been finished, but may save you a lot of money during the construction. Site costs and variations, we spoke about that as well. There's variations in there. there that you need to consider. Majority of it probably coming at the start of the build, again, more so than towards the middle or the end. Site inspections. Definitely get a building inspector. If you're new to the industry or new to building investment property or a home, it's worthwhile to get a site inspector or a building inspector just to give you that level of confidence as things that are getting done, and it can be rectified. Build contracts, you've heard it. You can do your own or with a solicitor. There's really good ones out there from the Master Builder Association or the HIA. So that's where talking to the builder. So I really want to thank you for today. I think there's been a lot of clarity that you've provided. I'm sure a lot of answers to a lot of people's questions regarding building costs and things that you need to be doing and when to get your builder involved in the process. I think people try now, and builders have been put in this spotlight where they're the big bad wolf. And I really want to take that away. I look at builders as part of my team. They help me build properties and they help me create value, and that makes money. So I really want people to look at your builder not as an enemy, a person that's against you. They're there to work with you. They're there to generate return and revenue for their company, but they're also there to create something for you. A lot of builders get into the industry not necessarily to make huge amounts of money, but they love creating. They love creating something from nothing, where it's a patch of dirt, to then building a beautiful dwelling for your family or your renters, or, for you to make a bit of money, because, I think that's what the industry is all there for, to help create cohesion between client and builder so everybody prospers. There's been a lot of doom and gloom, Huss, with all these builders going bust. And I think builders have been painted all with the same brush in a bad light, and I actually think that's not fair for the industry, because there's a lot of great people out there. But if you want to reach out to Huss, you definitely can. He's got a fantastic website, halliamhomes.com.au. You can reach out to him via email. I believe it's hello@halliamhomes.com.au. Is that correct, Huss?
That's it.
His details will be provided in the notes section below of this video. Feel free to reach out to him. Lots of years of experience. Huss, thank you very much for coming on board today. I really appreciate your time. And mate, now you've got a microphone that you can use for your next podcasts.
That's it. I'm hoping to be a regular guest for you, Jeremy. I'm happy to always answer the questions. And as you said, reach out, check out Instagram if you want. Always happy to help out.
Lovely. Mate, thank you very much for your time. Have a brilliant day. And to all listeners, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm Jeremy Iannuzzelli, and that is what school should have taught you.